So this course is on motivation, and there are a few things that motivate us more than hunger. We need food. We need food for building blocks. We need food for energy. But that's not always while we're eating. Sometimes we're eating because it's social. Sometimes we're motivated to eat because there's just more different types of wonderful food. So this lecture is about hunger. We're going to talk a little bit about the biology of digestion and hunger, but we're going to also talk about some of the psychological components that make us start eating, make us continue eating, and finally satiate us, make us stop eating. We'll end the lecture talking about a few kinds of eating disorders. So when we talk about food, we can talk about calories, energy. Now, the definition of a calorie, or more specifically a kilocalorie, is the amount of heat required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. It's a simple definition. But we're taking in calories and we're using those calories to create energy in the form of ATP. ATP is a chemical throughout our body that we use for just doing about everything, muscle movement and neurons firing and all those kinds of things. Depending on the size, men need about 2,900 calories a day. Women need closer to about 2,000. That's just a general estimate. So how are we using these calories? We have what's called resting metabolism. This is just energy required to do nothing, to be at rest. Our brain is still working, our body is still working. How many calories are we burning when we're really doing nothing? Resting metabolism can change depending on your overall activity, whether you've lost weight quickly, things like that. We have what also called the thermic effect, which is just how many calories do we need to burn in the process of digesting the food. So if we take in a certain amount of calories, we're going to burn that just to break down the food in our digestive system. And of course, physical activity, moving around, running around, it depends on the level of the exercise, but that's going to burn calories. But we can also burn calories just by thinking. We actually burn more calories when we're studying and thinking than when we're mindlessly watching television. So listening to this lecture, you burn a few calories. Now, this is an oversimplification, but I think it's sort of best to think about weight gain and weight loss as calories in, calories out, right? How many calories are you taking in a day? How many calories are you burning in a day? Now, that will depend a bit on the types of foods you're eating. What type of sugars are you eating? What types of fats are you eating? That's going to depend on how those calories are burned. Okay, so food and energies. So you've heard the word carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are just sugars. And there are simple sugars like glucose, sucrose, fructose. These are not all bound together in molecule chains. These are just simple sugars. Now, a lot of soft drinks and candy and even tomato sauce has a lot of simple sugar. We need these simple sugars for energy throughout our body, but especially our brain. Our body can use other forms of energy that we'll get to in a second, but not our brain. Our brain does not store energy well, so it needs fresh glucose all the time. So it's monitoring that all the time. Get low on glucose, what's known as hypoglycemic, and that can get very dangerous very fast. Fats or lipids, these are a great way of storing energy in the rest of the body, but not the brain. And so carbohydrates, sugars, if you have a lot of them, you're going to store them in glycogen. Now these are long chains of simple sugars. These are complex sugars, and you're going to break these off when you need them. But if you have so much stored complex sugars like glycogen, those are going to convert to fat. So if you have a low-fat diet but a high-sugar diet, you're still making fat. Okay, it's still going to turn in that way because it's a really great way to store energy, for example, in our adipose tissue, in our fat cells that are just below the skin. And then there are proteins. These are building blocks. These are enzymes. These are neurotransmitters. These are doing everything in our body. We can use proteins for energy, but we don't want to. If you're starting to break down proteins for energy, then you're probably need more carbohydrates, need more fats, and it's probably kind of dangerous. Okay, so there's this race, 100-mile road race. And imagine it takes 24 hours to run this race. And oftentimes people are assessed for protein metabolites at about 60 or 70 miles, because that means that things aren't going well. You are breaking down your proteins for energy, and that's not really safe. And they might encourage you, listen, we're getting all these indications you're breaking down your proteins. Maybe it's not the best time to continue the race. Now, we've had a very interesting relationship with sugars, especially recently. You know, our ancient diet, our evolutionary diet, didn't have a lot of simple sugars. There were in fruits and stuff, and highly valuable. So our brain is set up to really love those flavors. But then we started processing sugars, and the amount of sugars that we eat per year as a country has gone up tremendously. We eat a tremendous amount of sugar every day. We probably shouldn't eat, more than a few tablespoons or teaspoons of sugar, but many of us are eating 20, 30, 40 teaspoons of sugar a day because they're just in everything. Sugar is just in everything because we like the flavor and it sells, right? If things taste good, we buy it. And this is a trend throughout the world. We're eating more sugar in the world. But who's eating the most sugar? Okay, couple of European countries and the United States. We love our sugar. And that can cause a lot of problems, both in weight gain, but also energy and attention fluctuations throughout the day, especially in children. And also overeating sugar can lead to prediabetes and diabetes, which is a problem in regulating the hormone insulin, which helps to regulate sugar in our body. So let's get back to motivation. So one idea, these are called set point models, is that we monitor our levels of sugar in our blood, glucose. And we measure this and we evaluate this in different parts of the brain, but primarily in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has glucose detectors. And when there's low, we do a lot. We send signals to our body, to our muscle, and to our liver that store glycogen and tell the glycogen break up so I can use the simple sugars. If we've just had a giant soda at the movies, your brain is saying, I'm detecting a lot of free simple sugars in your blood. Let's send a signal to bind it up. Let's bind up that simple sugar into glycogen to store. So the idea is that we have sort of like a thermostat, like in a house, a thermostat. If it gets too hot, air conditioning comes on. If it gets too cold, heater comes on. That's called a feedback loop. Well, there's the idea that we have a glucose detectors that constantly try to keep that in balance. Blood glucose need drive, right? The blood glucose drops down, that creates a biological need, which turns into a psychological drive. What do I mean by that? It's very simple. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. You haven't eaten anything all day. Your brain begins to think about it. Your brain begins to attend to it. I'm hungry. I want to get some food. I'm going to talk to some friends about getting some food. I need to go get some food. Those are the drive states. And that was created by this biological need. The lateral hypothalamus has glucose detectors. If we destroy the cells produce little eating. In other words, the brain can't tell that you're low on glucose, so the animal's not hungry. We do this in animal models like mice. So, for example, we what's called lateral hypothalamus syndrome. It's if you destroy the lateral hypothalamus, this is kind of your hunger center and you don't feel hungry. Like the mouse gets skinny, doesn't eat much. However, right near the lateral hypothalamus is the ventromedial hypothalamus. Destroy that, the animal doesn't know when to stop eating. So it gets fat, right? So the lateral hypothalamus is thought to be the hunger center, one of many. And the ventromedial hypothalamus is thought to be the satiation center, the I'm not hungry anymore center. Both of these places detect glucose. We have other parts of the hypothalamus that are detecting other components of our diet, like lipids. So here's a few experiments to kind of demonstrate the glucostatic hypothesis. So Canfield had 3 groups of rats. He injected, group 1 was injected with glucose when glucose levels dropped. Yep, blink. Group 2 was injected with saline, salt water. That did not affect glucose levels. And group 3, they didn't get any injection at all. Injection with glucose caused a postponement of eating. Very simple. The brain of this little mouse is saying, I have enough glucose in my system, so I'm not going to be motivated to eat. Glucose is a drop in glucose leads to a need, leads to a drive, a motivation to seek out food. Another experiment called the 2-deoxyglucose experiment. This is a chemical, 2-DG, 2-deoxyglucose. It binds with glucose, so it cannot be detected in the lateral hypothalamus. In other words, there's glucose. The animal has plenty of glucose. It's doing fine with energy. It's just not being detected, right? Now, we can do this with humans, kind of an interesting little experiment. Inject a group of humans with 2-deoxyglucose, group 1. Group 2, inject them with saline, so they're not getting things that block the detection of glucose. And ask the participants, how hungry are you? What's your hunger level? And we find that hunger level was increased in the group, this is the group in red, that received 2-deoxyglucose. In other words, both groups had the same amount of sugar in their system. Group 1 was injected with 2-deoxyglucose, and the brain isn't detecting it. And so they're saying, I'm hungry. So we see that just glucose levels is a great motivator for hunger. The saline group, their hunger rating was lower. So now if there's the glucostatic, again, sort of a keeping at homeostasis, keeping a steady state of glucose, there's also the idea of the lipostatic theory, which is ideas that information from your fat cells, you have fat cells throughout your body, but there's a lot in just below your skin, are sending signals to the brain and saying, this is how much fat I have in the system. Again, constantly monitoring it. One of the things that it sends is a chemical called leptin. There's leptin detectors, and leptin comes from fat cells. How much we eat may be a product of some internal set point of fat. Drop that level, and we're motivated to eat. The body monitors free fatty acids, but also monitors leptin. Carbohydrates are converted to fats to help reestablish this set point. Now, this is really important for our ancient ancestors and also for people who live with food insecurity, right? They're not getting enough food. Especially if you're dropping weight or dropping lipid levels quickly, there's a lot of changes in the body that's going to say, oh, I need to get my fat levels up because I am starving, literally. Okay, now this set point can change. So let's say somebody has a set point of lipids, fat in their skin, and it drops really slowly. That's fine. There's not this motivation to get it back up. But if it drops quickly, then there's the motivation. Now, there's evidence that the body is guarding against rapid loss in fat, because the body and the hypothalamus isn't thinking, oh, I want to get a beach body for this summer, or I want to lose weight to be more healthy, or whatever. It says, you've lost weight quickly. I think you're starving to death. I think you are a Homo erectus out on the Serengeti plains and you haven't eaten for 4 days. So there are things to do to kind of deal with that. One of them is we get a decrease in resting metabolic rate. In other words, the calories you burn when you're doing nothing kind of slows down. It's trying to save as many calories as possible. It's an attempt to keep homeostasis. So in an experiment in 1989, Elliott measured the resting metabolic rate of obese women before, during, and after dieting. When women lost weight, their resting metabolic rate also decreased, reducing calorie burning and influenced weight gain. It's trying to get that person back up to their set point. They think the person's starving. You lose weight rapidly, and the body goes into overdrive to cut out any calorie burning that we can. So the idea that we adjust for this is evolutionary, right? It's called the famine hypothesis. Obesity can be understood as an adaptive mechanism from our evolutionary past. Our fat tissue, adipose tissue, evolved to protect against starving, against being out of food. So people who lose weight quickly produce evolutionary pressures to regain the weight and oftentimes overcompensate. This is why dieting often produces the yo-yo effect, named after the toy. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. When you lose weight, your body is doing a lot to gain that weight back. So let's say somebody is going to go on a crash diet. Crash diets are a term for diets where you lose weight really rapidly. And they advertise, this is great, the best diet in the world. Lose 25 pounds in the next month. Oh my gosh, this is great. And they put you on this very strict diet. And you're eating a lot of appetite suppressant diets and eating things with low calories, and you lose weight. If you follow their diet, you lose weight, and you lose weight rapidly. And you're thinking, this is the best diet in the world. Look, it did what it said. Well, meanwhile, the body's like, oh my God, you're starving to death. You're starving. Here's what I'm going to do. If you take in sugars, I'm going to convert it to fat because I got to get my fat set point back up, my lipid set point back up. So the sugars you intake, a lot of them are converted into fats, not used for energy. So you have very low energy. You need sugar. It also lowers your resting metabolic rate. The calories you were normally burning by just resting aren't there anymore. So you have to be twice as active and eat half as much food and eat less calories, because what happens is the crash diet ends. No one can survive on those stupid things. And so you go back and they say, now just eat a normal diet. But the normal diet is putting pressures to get you back up to this theoretical set point of fat. And so a normal diet is going to pull you back up. Unless you are going for 4-mile walks and unless you have a very restrict diet, you're going to gain that weight back even under normal circumstances. And then you don't blame the diet. You're like, the diet worked. It's me. It's my problem. Well, the diet caused this change in the body and the change in metabolism. Then something insidious happens. The brain and the body is basically saying, hey, you almost starved to death. Remember a few weeks ago when you lost 25 pounds in a month? I think you were starving to death. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. And to ensure that doesn't happen again, when you gain your weight back, I'm going to overshoot it a little. I'm going to reset your lipid set point so it's a little higher, so we can put a little extra storage on there in case you starve to death again like you did a couple weeks ago. So really the best way to gain weight is to lose weight rapidly. That's weird, but that's the case. We'll talk a little bit more about weight gain at the last part of this lecture. So what causes meals to start? What influences us to start eating? There's a lot of things. Well, one of them is just simply classical conditioning. We eat at certain times of the day, so our body prepares for that. If you eat every night at 6 o'clock, 5:45, you're going to release hormones that are going to make you hungry. You're also going to release hormones that are going to tell all the free sugars in your body to bind up. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So your glucose levels are going to drop. Why? Because the brain knows, oh, you're about to shove a bunch of food in your face. We can go ahead and bind up the glucose that's there already. And that will cause you to be hungry because the glucose levels drop. This is all Pavlovian. This is all classical conditioning. This is one of the reasons that if you ever fly to Europe and there's an 8-hour time change, your brain is still on a circadian rhythm, a clock. And at 2 a.m, you're like, it's time for dinner. I'm hungry. Because it's not only the outside cues that telling you that it's 6 o'clock at night, but there's internal cues as well. And those haven't adjusted. Very simple experiment. Had a group of rats. You turn on a light and you give the animal food. Turn on the light, give the animal food. It's Pavlovian conditioning. Light, food, light, food. The light is the conditioned stimulus. The food is the unconditioned stimulus, right? And then you had another stimulus, a tuning fork, a sound, that's associated with nothing. So when the light comes on, you get fed. When the tuning fork comes on, you don't, for the little rat. And what we found was how quickly they began eating depended on the stimulus. Play the tuning fork and then animals wait a long time before they start eating. That's the CS minus, conditioned stimulus minus. Turn on the light and they start eating right away. It just shows that stimuli can induce eating. We have stimuli. I'm telling you, what if you walked into a kitchen and it smells delicious? Somebody's cooking up some sauteed thing with garlic and chicken and it's so good and it butter and it permeates the whole kitchen. You don't think you're going to start getting very highly motivated to eat because those smells are associated with eating. Another interesting experiment I think was done by Cannon and Washburn, where they put a little balloon down into the stomach. It was actually Washburn that did this, and pressed a little button if he felt hungry. And they simply were correlating hunger pains with, or hunger contractions of the stomach with how you felt like eating. We felt this. And if the stomach is expanded, the brain says, oh, there's a bunch of stuff in there, I'm not as hungry. So you could actually fill the balloon up and they'd stop being hungry. Shrink the balloon and Washburn would say, hey, I'm starting to feel a little hungry. Right? We've all had this kind of thing. The emptiness of the stomach is actually sending a signal through the vagus nerve, a cranial nerve, up to the brain to say, I'm empty, or these muscles are stretching, I'm either hungry or I'm full. Okay, so what other things? So there's another thing called sensory-specific satiety. And this has a lot to do with the variety of food. What causes a meal to continue? Variety. Variety of this is the spice of life. And so if you have food that has very little variability in flavor, you're not going to eat as much. Go to a buffet that's filled with delicious foods from all over the world, you're going to eat more than you typically would. It's literally called the buffet effect. We eat more when there's greater variety of flavors. So head to one of these Chinese buffets. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at that and I'm getting hungry right now. I'd have a little bit of these noodles and I'd have some of this over here. And you go back and you fill your plate because you want to taste all the noodles. And the drives that reduce your hunger are not really there when there's a great deal of variety of food. Very simple experiment. They just offer people one flavor or three flavors. You had a one flavor group, they got one flavor, and these group got three flavor, and these are different times, and we just see that if there are three flavors, we're going to eat more than their one flavor. A very simple experiment with humans, just showing triple the flavors, and you're going to get a lot more food consumed. So we also talk about palatability. That's just how well does it taste? How good does it taste? The hedonic, the pleasurable components of food. It's going to highly influence how much you eat. Things that taste better, you're going to eat more of it. Variety and hedonic pleasure. We also get what's called the cephalic effect. Cephalic means head. And when we smell food, when we see food, Not seafood like shrimp, which is really good. I'm saying visually seafood and smell and taste. That's going to cause these autonomic responses. And we're going to produce salivation. We're going to produce gastric juices in our stomach, digestive juices, digestive enzymes that are going to be coming from the pancreas that are going to aid in digestion. We're going to increase insulin. All these things, these are also very Pavlovian. All this change in your digestive system, because you're seeing and smelling and giving little tastes of food, are going to increase your hunger. I mean, a little test. Get your favorite food. I mean your favorite food. Maybe you like some good orange chicken from Panda Express. So flavorful. Order it, smell it, taste a little bit, and then set it to the side. And don't eat it. Go watch some TV. Go do something else with that thing of orange chicken from Panda Express sitting on the counter. You will see, because your digestive system is changing, you will think about it. You can't attend to what you're looking at with the TV. You can't read a book because your whole brain is changing because of the sight, smell, and taste of food, the anticipation. So the increase in these autonomic responses to the sight, smell, and taste of food, this activation of this salivary gland, the activation of the digestive system, all these things induce hunger, induce consumption of food, increase drives. Look at that. I don't know what that is, but I want to eat that. That's like, it's like chocolate on marshmallow on a chocolate chip cookie. Look at that. Okay. I think you might, that's kind of that orange chicken I was talking about, but maybe has more flavors. Okay. You can go ahead and stop the lecture now, put it on pause, and go get yourself something to eat. I think I might do that. I'll wait. Okay, you back? All right. So we have these innate food preferences. Innate meaning genetic. And we tend to prefer sweet things to bitter. Bitter can be associated with things that aren't good for us, that could be damaging. So little babies, they want sweet things, they want salty things, because sweet things are providing them energy, the brain is growing very quickly. We can develop different tastes as we get older. There's also a lot of genetic influence on the tastes we like, the amount of taste buds we have, right? So, for example, my wife likes very bitter beer, and I don't. If I'm going to have any alcohol, it's going to be in a sweet blended drink of some sort. It's embarrassing, but I still drink it. Rats and humans show an innate preference for sweet and salty foods. Sweet, necessary for sugars for the brain to work, and salt. Now, in order for neurons to work, we need sodium, we need chlorine, we need potassium, we need these types of salts. Reduced salt intake can affect taste and lead to salt cravings. No salt, brain's not going to work. Young kid, yum. Oh, wait, that's not right. So now let's look at evolution again. We've talked a little bit about this, about preferences. So we need sugars, we need fats, we need salts to survive. Simple sugars might not be that common in our ancient ancestors' normal diet. They weren't getting the 64-ounce Dr. Pepper at the movies. The simple sugars were kind of coming in things like fruits, but even the fruits, the sugars are bound up in fibers, and they need to be broken down in the mouth and in the stomach to get to those simple sugars. But if you don't create simple sugars, you die. So the brain is highly sensitive to finding sugars very rewarding. But we also need fats for energy storage, and of course salts. No salt and the brain's not going to work and you're going to die. So we're highly reinforced by sugars, fats, and salts. So unfortunately, the parts of the brain that are detecting these flavors, these types of sugar, salts, and fats, and are reinforced by them, are very similar to what was in Australopithecus, what was in Neanderthals. We live in a modern time, but we are still highly sensitive to that. Now, if you want to make money, sell this stuff to people. Sell these sugars and these fats and these salts, because that's what we want, because they're highly rewarding. The dopamine system responsible for reinforcement, that plays a role in sex and addiction, is highly active, highly sensitive to sugars, fats, and salts. So, in an experiment back in 2007, Lenore gave rats a choice between artificial sweetener, just something that initiated that sweet flavor, and the very addictive drug of cocaine. 94% of the rats preferred the artificial sweetener to the cocaine. Given a choice, they got to experience both of them, and they wanted the sweet flavor. And they found similar results when they didn't use artificial sweetener. They actually used sucrose, sugar. So we always think of cocaine as being, oh, terribly, the most addictive thing. Give a rat a choice, it's going to want the sweet things. Sweet things can be very addictive as well. And we're bombarded by them. We have sweet things in every holiday that we have, right? Starting in Halloween, sugar. Thanksgiving, sugar sweet pies. Hanukkah and Christmas, filled with sugary stuff. Then we get into Valentine's Day and we get into Easter, and everything is celebrated with sugars. We eat far too much sugar. Why? Because it's delicious, it's rewarding. The part of our brain that finds it rewarding has been set down millions and millions of years ago. So we get what's called the mismatch hypothesis when it comes to evolutionary pressure. Mismatch, which is very simply, we have a brain that evolved and ate food millions and millions of years ago throughout our mammalian evolution, but it's not matching the availability of those types of food in modern times. It can get us into a lot of trouble. Mismatch hypothesis, the idea that our body and brain and digestive system were set up for foods that we ate millions of years ago, but are very different today. And so we sell, because it makes people a lot of money, tons of sugary stuff. So genes that might have been adaptive way before, making an animal very sensitive to sugars and salts so that it would learn where to go to get them, and it would be highly motivated to get them, and it would survive. Those same genes that set up our brain today motivate behaviors that are rather maladaptive, which is eating as much sugar as we should in a month in an afternoon. We're also bombarded on social media, at the store, in billboards, whatever, these symbols of these types of food. They're right there. They're always there. Walk into a grocery store. The first thing you'll see when you walk through the door is a row of high sugar stuff. And because you're walking in, it's the first thing you see, you're going to spontaneously buy. What's the last thing that they offer to sell you as you leave the grocery store? What's right next to the checkout? Cupcakes and Hostess Twinkies and candies and sugars. And we're bombarded, right? And we're just hit with all these stimuli that are associated with these things, and it breaks us down, and we eat them and causes problems. Okay, we also have learned food preferences. We have innate and we have learned. And most animals tend to be what is known as neophobic with food. Neo means new. Phobic means fear of. Animals are very wary of food they haven't eaten before. And it takes them a while to get used to it. We eat foods that are familiar to us. This is called the mere exposure effect. And this has a little bit to do with our culture. The kind of food we ate as children, that we were exposed to as children, we tend to eat more when we're adults. Mere exposure. And we have that kind of an innate tendency to prefer foods we've had before. A very simple experiment by Pliner. Subjects drank 4 tropical juices, 0 to 20 times. The subjects were asked to rate the likability of the juice. Rating correlated with how many times they had it. The more they drank the juices, the more they liked them. We also have learned components that are Pavlovian, just taste aversion. These can be really extreme, but I bet you've experienced this before. You maybe had a food. Ooh, this is a rather unique flavored food. How delicious. And because the food was spoiled and it caused you to have food poisoning, or you just happen to have the flu that night and you throw up and you feel sick. While you're sick, you still are tasting a few of those flavors. I'm sorry, that's a little disgusting. But when you're throwing up, the food is coming back and there's some stimuli, there's some smells associated with that. This is survival stuff, and your brain has a whole system set up to be like, okay, you ate some food, it was a bit novel, it was a bit new, and you got sick. Do not eat that again. And so you might in the future not even realize you have that aversion. And there's the food again. Oh, I remember having that food about 6 months ago. I really like that food. And you go to taste it and you feel this overwhelming sense of nausea. You're like, what the hell? And then you put it together. Oh, that was the food I ate the night I had a stomach flu. And we can do this with rats. It's very simple. You take an unconditioned stimulus. This is Pavlovian. One, for example, is lithium chloride. Inject an animal with lithium chloride. It's a simple chemical. It's not going to kill them. It just makes them sick. Just makes them feel sick. And that produces a feeling of nausea and a feeling of sickness. That's the unconditioned response. Then take any food, especially a novel food. Here's some cheese. Here's some cheese and a little injection with lithium chloride. The cheese, in this case, the food, is the conditioned stimulus. And it will produce the same response as the unconditioned stimulus. Lithium chloride makes them sick, so the food in the future makes them sick, right? And so we kind of see this kind of stuff, happen throughout our life. It can happen at an extreme level where you are terribly sick and you couldn't get that food near your mouth because the smell just makes you nauseous. Maybe you have an aversion to that. But sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes you'll have a little food that night. You got a little stomach ache. I got a little stomach. I'm not feeling so good or something. Then you still might not like that food in the future and not be really aware of why. It's just classical conditioning. Okay. What else continues us to eat or stops us from eating? We eat more socially. We eat more when we're around other people. Simple as that. Crowds make us eat. We're a social animal, and we eat socially. De Castro found that the size of the meal was directly correlated with the number of people who were present. Simple experiment. We've all experienced this, having to unbutton a couple buttons after a Thanksgiving dinner. But it also depends a little bit on the sex of the people that we're eating with. So Alan and O'Donnell in 2011 just simply monitored how much food were bought by college students at a cafeteria. How much did men buy? How much did women buy? Also recorded the gender of who these people ate with. They ordered food and then they sat with people. Like they're in a group, like, hey, go get some food and we'll all sit together. When women sit with other women, they ordered on average 833 calories. But if they were going to be sitting with men, mixed group, men and women, they drop their calories. So when women eat with men and women, they lower the amount of calories they order. When men ate with men, they ordered 952 calories if they're just eating with other men. But if men ate with women, mixed group, men and women, they bumped up their calories. Kind of interesting. Women eating with men drop their calories. Men eating with women increase their calories. So what are stopping some of the ways we're eating? So stomach contraction, stretching, stretch detectors in the stomach, the ventromedial hypothalamus. We talked about that. The brain is saying, oh, there's a lot of glucose floating around in the blood. Stop eating. And the ventromedial hypothalamus is regulating hormones, but it's also sending signals up to the brain for you to change your motivation state, your drive state. So these glucose detectors lesion the ventromedial hypothalamus again, and the animal just keeps eating. May affect the release of insulin. There's a hormone called cholecystokinin, CCK. It's a hormone that is released in the digestive system and helps regulate how food is moved from the stomach to the small intestine. right? That movement goes through this little thing called a pyloric sphincter, and it moves it through and helps regulate that. Well, if there's lots of CCK in the system, then there's lots of food in the stomach and lots of food going into the small intestine. CCK is sending a message, a chemical messenger up to the brain and saying, there's a lot of food down here, stop eating. Inject an animal CCK and they stop eating, okay? So here's that idea that I was talking about. The stomach is filled, here's that pyloric sphincter, and here is the small intestine, and CCK is releasing. It also causes the gallbladder to release bile, which helps to break down fat. It does not affect the brain directly, but it sends a messenger, a chemical messenger. Increase CCK, decrease appetite. There's a number of hormones that regulate our hunger. For example, another one called ghrelin does just the opposite. Ghrelin is a hormone that is released from the small intestine and the stomach, the digestive system. And if ghrelin is released, it's going to many areas of the brain and it is inducing hunger. So you'll see if you eat every night at 6 o'clock, 5:45 in the afternoon, ghrelin will spike, will begin to go up, and will create that hunger for you. Well, when we stop has a lot to do with memory. It's as simple as this. I remember I just ate a big meal, so I'm not going to eat anymore. I remember it. Now, if you take people who have damage to the hippocampus is helping to convert short-term to long-term memory. It's helping to remember you just ate. Those people, they might eat a second lunch later if they don't remember they had the first lunch. Even though there's food in the system and the glucose is high and the hypothalamus is detecting, memory is going to serve a big role. If they don't have that memory system working, they might eat a second and third lunch. Okay, what else affects our eating? So stress. Stress increases cortisol hormone, we've talked about this, which increases the reward value of sugars and salts. So we have areas of the brain, the dopamine centers of the brain, that are influencing motivation, influencing reinforcement, influencing addiction. These areas, especially an area called the nucleus accumbens, is highly sensitive to cortisol and will increase the motivating components of eating. So when you're stressed, you want to eat more, and you tend to want to eat more things like sugars, salts, and fats. I know this to be true. During finals week, what kind of food are you eating? It's stressful, eating all sorts of food, maybe food you shouldn't be eating. Obese women eat more after watching a sad movie than compared to a neutral movie. The study was kind of interesting. It just increase the negative emotion and you increase eating. Stress eating is actually a real thing. And one of the ways to reduce bad eating is don't necessarily attack the eating part of it, attack the stress part. Deal with the stress part. Now, what we also know is that the system that responds to stress, we have the fast reaction with the adrenaline, we have the slow reaction, which is known as the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the adrenal gland and cortisol. We also know that stress eating reduces this stress response. It's kind of a feedback loop. If you are highly stressed, cortisol goes up in your brain and you stress eat, but also the stress eating, the eating itself, will reduce the stress response. It's a coping mechanism, not the most healthy one. Okay, there's several types of eating disorders, very common in the United States. Anorexia is an eating disorder where a person, mostly girls, but guys can do this too, where they have this dysmorphic idea of their body shape, that they think that they're fat when they're too skinny. Bulimia is oftentimes occurs when people are purging food. They're eating maybe a lot and purging food. These are very unhealthy. Anorexia has a high mortality rate. And anorexia and bulimia and eating disorders increase proportionally to how much time people are on social media. It's really this horrible thing that's happened starting in about 2010, where we have these idealized models, influencers, and these women who have girls who develop because there's such a there's a range of body shapes because of mostly genetics, and they are seeing these models and these influencers, and we're getting into an increased problem in how they see their own bodies and body dysmorphia, which is kind of a terrible thing. Not as common as men, but it does happen. About 15% of young women have some kind of disordered eating pattern. Again, highly correlated with social media use. And of all the psychological disorders, these have some of the highest mortality rates of, and something to be very highly concerned about. Let's look at one thing, overweight and obesity. So, and these numbers are coming from the CDC. About 68% of adults in the U.S. are overweight. 33% are slightly or moderate overweight. 35% are obese. And this is also true for children. It increases in all ethnicity and age group, although those numbers change slightly by ethnicity. 98% of dieters regain all of the weight they managed to lose, plus 10 extra pounds within 5 years. This is that problem with these horrible crash diet weight loss programs. We've talked about why that is. We can look at body weight and identify obesity, overweight by body mass index, which takes into account a person's height and a person's weight. And so when we get out into these numbers, we're getting into obesity. Now, I want to show you this interesting series of slides that comes from the CDC. And this is starting in 2011, but I will tell you that these numbers have been going up and increasing since probably late 1970s, right? The rate of obesity. These are the percentage of people in each state that are considered to be obese by the body mass index. So here we are, 2011, and the oranges and the reds increase higher, greens and yellows are lower. So this is 2011, 2012. So 2011, 2012, 2013, we're starting to see orange and red increase. 2014, 2015, the greens are going away. Right, 2017, now we're starting to see even more. We tend to see it higher in southern states, just a fact. 2019, 2020, 2021. So since the late 1970s, the United States and around the world, but the United States has shown a really large increase in overweight and obesity. There's a number of reasons why. We've talked about them, the kinds of diets, the kinds of availabilities of sugars and fats, where sugars are converted into fats, those kinds of things. But this is a growing issue. And so here's obesity rate above 30 body mass index by percentage, by age, okay? And you can see these numbers these are obesity rates in the 40 percentile, 42, 43. These are really high numbers. This is also a real problem with children. If any group has shown a rapid increase in obesity rates, it's children. And you can see the percentages are really high in children. This is by age of the children. Young kids, they're growing rapidly. They can eat all they want, but then they start eating 6 and 11, 12. We're getting into some pretty high percentages here because of having a lot to do with diet. So here are some changes in obesity rates. Here we are back in just 2000. Again, this started back in the 1970s. You can see the increase. We also saw an increase during the COVID pandemic. People were not as active. They're not out as much. And there was a lot of stress. And with stress comes stress eating. This is change in adolescents and children in obesity rates. Very low. Here we are getting into the 1970s, 80s, and you can start to see this rapid increase. A big change in the weight of people. This correlates with diabetes. Now let's separate here. There's diabetes type 1. It's called juvenile onset. This is genetic. The pancreas and the production of insulin is not working right. It's called an autoimmune. Your own immune system is attacking your pancreas. This happens between 10 and 15% people, strong genetic component, they're taking insulin. But type 2 diabetes, sometimes it's called adult onset, but we're seeing this in adolescents. Insulin's not working. We use the term insulin resistant. Insulin is doing many things. It's a hormone. It's helping the sugar, glucose, get into cells so the glucose can be broken down and made to convert ADP into ATP to create energy. Insulin is also helping to take extra glucose and bind it up into glycogen. Insulin serves many functions. If insulin's not working right, or we become insulin resistant, we're going to have a lot of problems. Got to keep that insulin balanced. And this is 85 to 90% of those with diabetes are type 2. Interesting thing about type 2. Type 2 increases with weight. As people get more obese, it increases with weight. It's associated with a lot of different kinds of diseases, heart disease, vision problems, all those things. But when people lose weight, they've lost the weight, and they get back to the BMI that is closer to normal or overweight, the insulin can come back. All right. So type 2 diabetes can be reduced when people lose weight. It's the 8th leading cause of death in the U.S. It's growing. It's one of the biggest growing facts. This is an interesting map that you kind of have to figure out. But the darker the colors, blues and purples, the darker the blues and the purples, it's the relationship between high levels of obesity and high levels of diagnosis of diabetes. So you can see here, especially in the South, but it's everywhere, that as weight goes up, the probability of diabetes increases. Weight and diabetes are really highly correlated. So what are some of the risk factors associated with obesity? Well, it can, not always, lead to high blood pressure, hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, gallbladder disease, premature death, arthritis, right? Other problems, people tend to have, who are obese tend to have sleeping disturbances, tend to have sleep apnea problems, right? Problems with breathing, inability to participate in certain things, some social problems with regard to sports and stuff, discriminatory problems that we might see in jobs, and of course prejudice and things like that. However, obesity does not necessarily lead to serious psychological problems, and in fact, people who are overweight and are comfortable with that might be fine, might show actually less stress response than somebody who's constantly worrying about their weight. This is really important. Any problems that they're going to have, psychological problems, are not going to necessarily due to them. It's due to discrimination and prejudice by society. So what's causing this? Well, we see the increase in obesity and overweight. So there's obviously something that's happened in the past 30, 40, 50 years that have led to this increase in obesity rate. Has a lot to do with changing diet, has a lot to do with changing activity levels, things like that. We're just eating a lot more sugar now, right? But weight, your range of weight, of what you're going to be, it's genetic. It's mostly genetic, right? There's been 200 genes implicated in contributing to weight and obesity. Here's some results of looking at monozygotic twins and dizygotic twins. Monozygotic twins share the same DNA. They're identical twins. Dizygotic twins are brothers and sisters, brothers and brothers, sisters and sisters. They share, on average, 50% of their gene frequency. And if you just look at the correlation between these two, much higher in height and, of course, weight in monozygotic twins here in blue compared to dizygotic twins. So this is just a study of correlations. This is just showing the tremendous influence of genetics on weight. If you want to know why you are the weight you are, it's mostly genes. It's mostly genes. Give yourself a break, okay? But if you want to lose some weight, let me help you out just a little bit. First, again, it's genetic, okay? Give yourself a break. Love who you are. Accept who you are, right? But if you say, well, to be healthier or to do whatever, maybe I want to lose a little bit of weight. I'm going to give you some suggestions about this. First, do not lose weight rapidly. Wait slowly. I know that's not as fun. You're like, oh, I want to lose 10% of my body weight by the next couple weeks. No. Because that puts all those pressures on your body to gain that weight back. The faster you lose weight, the more you're going to gain back. Okay? This stuff is all horrible stuff. Rapid weight loss. No more than a pound a week. Pound, maybe 2 pounds a week. I know it's going to take you time, but if you do this for, 6 months, you've lost a lot of weight. Allow your body to lose a little weight and then stay at a level for a little bit. Let your body weight, your lipid levels get nice and secure, and then lose maybe a little bit more. Don't eat anything. Don't change your diet in any ways that you could not change permanently, right? So if you lose weight because you do nothing but have cabbage soup all day, fine. But you have to eat cabbage soup the rest of your life. You can't do that. So the changes you make to diet should be changes you want to make the rest of your life. Very simple. You drink high sugar sodas or Monster drinks or whatever. You say, okay, only on the weekends, or okay, once a week or twice a week or something. Just cut down a couple days and just say, that's my life now. Make plans that you can do the rest of your life, and cut down on the sugar. Those are just really bad things. You're like, but they're low in fat. Yeah, but they're going to turn into fat anyway. We should not. Our bodies are not set up to drink 64 ounces of soda. So maybe try to cut that down. A little bit more water there. Diet drinks might not be the solution because it tricks the body a little bit. Here's what it does. You drink a diet soda and it's high in a artificial sweetener. It doesn't have any calories. You're like, oh, that must be great. But here's what your brain does. It's kind of a weird thing. It says, I'm detecting a lot of sweetness coming into the body. So here's what I'm going to do. The excess sugar, the sugar that's in your system, I'm going to bind up into glycogen. I'm going to store because you're bringing in all this sweetness. But the sweetness isn't bringing in the calories, isn't bringing in the glucose. So a lot of times what people do is they drink a diet soda and then the brain finds a way to find you that sugar you missed the rest of the day. You tend to eat more sugar the rest of the day when you drink diet sodas. So, if that's what you like, fine. Just cut it down, right? Eat less processed sugar. That's not an easy thing. This is one of the hardest things to do because everything in our diet has high sugar. You have to really look out for that. Eat fiber. Like if you say, okay, I'm going to drink apple juice. That's good for you. That's made of apples. Apple juice. No, apple juice it's a Dr. Pepper. It's the same. It's the Coca-Cola. It's the same thing. It's just simple sugars. You want apple juice, eat an apple because there's fiber in the apple that binds up the simple sugar and makes it difficult to digest. Okay, another thing. Spend as much money as you possibly can on treats and go and buy them single. Go, if you want a Hostess cupcake, you go and get it. But you make an effort and you pay the money for it. Seems weird. You're like, well, no, here's what I'm going to do. I like a Hostess Twinkie. I love them. And they cost, over $2 at the gas station. And I know that if I go to Costco and I buy them in bulk, I'll only eat one a week and I'll save all this money. We don't do it. It's the availability. If you buy a bulk of them, you will eat them rapidly, okay? And when possible, avoid the all-you-can-eat buffet. Why? Sensory-specific satiety and flavors and all those things, and you're going to eat all you can. If it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, you're going to eat all you can. Go out for a celebration, have some fun, go do it, but that's not your regular diet. Slowly increase exercise. Exercise routines are so good for reducing stress, and eating and stress go hand in hand. So exercise is great for reducing stress. It also increases your resting metabolism. If you're active, you're burning more calories when you're not active. You do not have to run a marathon. You do not have to spend 5 hours in the gym lifting up things and putting them down. 30-minute walk. Just get the heart rate elevated, going and moving. It reduces your stress, and it also burns calories, and it also changes your cortisol levels. It doesn't have to be extreme. It just has to be consistent. Okay, that's all for now. Go have yourself a nice, healthy meal. Create a meal. Learn to cook. Have a relationship with food where somebody isn't handing it to you in a bag across a window. Okay?